All right, we are live for another episode of Performance That Matters, coming to you from our new home at the Emerald Studios in Perth. I'm joined by Lauren Nash, the X-Fit dietitian. Loz, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for not making me do the first intro of the day. You do podcasts so frequently. This is au naturel for you. As much as I love them, it takes me like a little bit to get back into the groove. So listen out, everyone, for the next intro because I'll have to do my best.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about that the other day. Is you can be having like a totally normal conversation, and then the second the camera turns on and then the mics are on, and everyone just freezes and they're like, "Oh my god!" and you just forget everything that you're saying. But
I know. Thankfully, though, from my early days as an intern, I've had extensive media training at DFT, so I think that makes life a bit easier.
yeah, thrown in the deep end. But anyway, so end of the year, end of 2025, we've had a very big year. We opened up a Q&A for our followers to throw in what I thought would be just a couple of questions, and we got inundated. So we're going to spend probably the next couple episodes just going through these questions because they were awesome. They came through and they're all different types as well. They were across combat sports, endurance sports. Some of our horse racing fans got in there about latest research in sports science, sodium, lots of different cool things. So let's just go through. We've picked probably 20 of these questions to go through. Let's just go back and forth. We'll just start now. So, Loz, let's kick it off.
Yeah, all right. Question number 1. Can I eat carbs during fight week?
This is a conversation I recently had as well with one of our athletes that was in fight week. Short answer is yes, you absolutely can eat carbs during fight week. And the reason being is they're good fuel. And at the end of the day, you're using multiple different strategies to get your weight down. The one that's going to move the needle the most in most cases is that glycogen reduction. What a lot of athletes don't understand is just how much glycogen they have. And for the people at home listening, your glycogen is the stored carbohydrates in your muscle and liver. And if you're, say, a professional fighter, you could be holding up to 800 grams of muscle glycogen in your muscles, plus you got 2 to 3 grams of water on top of it. That's why when you remove those carbohydrates, you get such a big drop. But the thing is you don't need to go completely depleted. And you can go completely depleted pretty quickly if you're eating less than 50 grams of carbs a day and training still during fight week. You'll deplete pretty quickly, but you don't need to. Even if you're removing 50 to 60% of those glycogen stores, you're going to get a significant drop in weight. That's why a lot of our guys, you'll see them, especially in the morning at the start of the day, when the breakfast time comes around, we're giving them carbohydrates because they're going to burn that fuel during the day. And then we're giving them pretty strategically around training. So our guys are routinely eating 100 to 150 grams of carbs per day during fight week and still losing weight. So yes, absolutely, you can have carbs during fight week.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things with some of our newer clients. They see their fight week protocol and they're like, are you sure I'm allowed to eat carbs?
Yeah, a big thing with it as well, I find, is that it depends how much you're pushing the limits to. When you're pushing these 10 to 12% at fight week, you kind of have to put everything into it and go, okay, I need to reduce carbs as much as possible. I need to do a pretty aggressive water load. I need to sweat as much as I can. Sodium, I need to reduce down, even though these are things that I would say are not best practice. You want to be cutting 8% most going into fight week. And the reason you want to do that is so you don't have to be so aggressive. You can still make your weight, but you're putting your body through less stress to get there. That's why I think setting up your fight camp so you don't have to cut as much weight when you get to fight week, so you don't have to put so much stress on your body, end up at the same point, just following a path of least resistance. So yes, if you do everything right, you can absolutely have carbs during fight week.
Winner. How good is that?
I think that's answered pretty well. Let's go this.
Absolutely.
This is a good one. You know what, Loz? I had this convo with a client recently, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a sec, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. For all endurance athletes, this is such a big problem. And the question is, best way to train your gut. Is there a specific method or protocol that you recommend?
Really good question. And I suppose, for people listening, ultimately why we want to train our gut is so that we can be comfortable digesting carbohydrates and food and drink ultimately while we're exercising, which is pretty unnatural, right? Growing up, you don't really do a lot of sports where you're eating a lot of food and drinking during exercise. So it's quite crazy because typically when we're eating a meal, we're at rest. Body's super easy, can digest, but when we're exercising, we're more in that fight or flight mode, not a lot of blood flow in the gut, which can cause problems. People throwing up on the side of the race, having indigestion, reflux, going to the portaloo a few too many times. So when it comes to training the gut, I feel like we can kind of look at it in two ways. You can train your gut outside of training with your broader diet, and we can also do it in those acute periods around training. So ultimately, one, if we think about, our broader diet, if you're someone that has a relatively low carb diet and or maybe you're under eating, intentionally or unintentionally trying to lose a bit of weight during your race prep, your body's not really exposed to a high amount of carbohydrates, and it's not, I guess, as normal to digest that. And then if you're going into a long training run and you're expecting your body to now digest 80 grams of carbs per hour over 3 hours, that might be more than the total amount of carbohydrates you're eating in a day. So you're kind of asking your body to do something that it's not conditioned to. It's like asking yourself to go out for a 5K time trial when all you've ever been doing is an easy 2 or 3K walk run. So I feel like you need to expose your gut in a day-to-day sense to what you'd like it to achieve in a race where we've got higher heart rate, less blood flow in the gut, a bit of a stressful situation as well. So I'd say outside of your training, if you're a bit nervous or you don't want to start eating during training straight away, build up your carbohydrate intake specifically outside of training. We kind of have that carbohydrate recommendations of 3 to 12 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight, pending your training load each day. So if you're currently sitting around that maybe 3 or 4 grams per kilogram of body weight, build that up maybe to 5 or 6 or 6 or 7 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, and see how you feel in that like broader diet. And then when it comes to, I guess, around training, ultimately, you might be listening thinking, I can't get up in the morning and eat something before training, makes me feel sick. We're not asking you to go straight into a bowl of porridge before training. I feel like you got to kind of scale it back. So if you're new to eating before training or you do currently have problems, let's just go say about an hour before training, you're having something small. Maybe it's half a banana, it's a couple of rice cakes, maybe like 20 to 30 grams of carbohydrate. So a small amount, but a little bit further out from training. Ultimately, over time, what you want to do is you want to decrease the amount of time it takes, between waking up and eating and training. So maybe it goes from 60 minutes to 50 minutes. Maybe it goes from 50 minutes to 45 minutes. Maybe after a few weeks, you're able to kind of sit down, have a couple of rice cakes, and then 30 minutes later, you're out the door going for a run. That's what we really want to try and achieve is one, reducing the amount of time it takes to eat. And then also we want to increase the amount of carbohydrates we can eat during that period of time as well. So maybe we start at 20 grams of carbohydrates. So maybe that's a half a Morton solid bar. But over time, we're building that up to, one piece of toast with jam and peanut butter, which is maybe giving us, 25 grams. And then we're kind of building that up to half a cup of oats with a bit of maple syrup and some blueberries, which might be around, 45 or 50 grams. So over time, we're just gradually increasing that amount of carbohydrates. So that's kind of before training. And then when it comes to during training, again, you see some of your favorite athletes smashing 240 grams of carbs per hour. You definitely don't want to start there. You're going to be guaranteed to feel sick. Start small. If you're new or you just really struggle, 15, 20 grams of carbs per hour, 2 lolly snakes. You don't need a lot, but start with that. And again, over time, increase that 25 grams of carbs per hour, 1 gel. 30 grams, 40, find your, I guess, happy amount, but push that over time and just kind of assess how are you feeling, how's your heart rate, how's your indigestion. And really it is something that you can train like a muscle, really. You're doing the hard work, doing your swims, bikes, runs, training sessions. Train yourself to be better at digesting food. And it kind of is similar to, we were talking off air about competitive, food eating. And it's crazy, right? Obviously, we're not comparing a hot dog eating competition to an Ironman. But the reason these guys are so, I guess, able to consume, 25 hot dogs in an hour is because they have conditioned their gut to be able to consume, digest, and absorb that nutrition so quickly. And I guess you can kind of maybe compare it. If I sat down and was told to eat 25 hot dogs in an hour, I probably wouldn't do a very good job, but I'd probably do a better job than someone who can't even have maybe 1 gel per hour on the bike. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think when it comes to the best way to train your gut to be able to handle those carbs, we often straight away think, okay, I need to do this in my long run, which is true. Yes, you need to put that to practice in your long run. What everyone forgets is that your day-to-day diet has such a big influence on that as well, because what you're doing in that long run is you're training your body to get the carbs in the mouth through your stomach. Then you've got to get it in your gut, across the intestinal wall, into the blood, and then from the blood into the muscle to be used. There's a number of steps that the body has to go through in order to use that carbs as energy. You can train that in your day-to-day diet. And like you said, if you're someone who eats a lower carb diet or even not a adequate carb diet for the training that you're doing, your body is going to struggle to do that when it comes to the long run, and you're asking it to take on 60, 70, 80, 100 plus grams of carbs an hour. So I think, yes, you need to do the strategic progressive overload, step up during your long runs and get that down pat, but you need to look at it day to day. Am I getting in enough carbs? And I always take our clients who I go, hey, just do simple maths. If we're saying 6 grams per kilo, if you're 70 kilos, that's 70, 140, 210, 280, 350, 420 grams of carbs you should be eating a day considering that a Subway foot-long sub has 80 grams in it, when you think about it, like they go, oh, I'm probably under eating carbs massively during my day-to-day. That's where I say you got to start if you want to do this properly.
Yeah, good point. All right, next question. Can I have creatine during fight week?
I would say this is the most asked question I get as a combat sports dietitian. Short answer is yes, you can have creatine if you follow these rules. If you are not doing an excessively big weight cut where you're losing 10 to 12% of your body weight during fight week, if you've been habitually using creatine for longer than 6 months and you're at a point where you're at a maintenance dose and you're not fluctuating between loading doses and maintenance doses, and you understand what your body does during fight week and how you normally drop weight in response to all the other fight week strategies. If you tick all those 3 boxes, I say, yeah, okay, Loz, you can absolutely use creatine during fight week because there's so many parameters we can control. And even if there is a little bit of additional fluid retention, we can deal with it. If you come to me and you say, hey, Geordie, I'm doing a big weight cut. I've only just started using creatine. And you know what? I've never really done a proper weight cut. I don't know what my body's going to do. I'm saying, no, you're not having creatine whatsoever. And if you're that person, don't have it. Just reintroduce it post weigh-ins. That's how we go about it.
Yeah, good question. And I think you maybe made a comment one time, and I've said that to a few clients in the past. It's like all of those things definitely considered. But sometimes, like, if you're cutting so much weight that you need to think about taking creatine in a combat sport where you're a high risk of, head contact, concussion, it's like, are you cutting too much weight? Is, I think, something that stuck with me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question. Where are we at? Let's pick. Now, this is a good one. And this is a real topical one too. And we've spoken about this so much. Let's answer this question in reference of, let's say, an Ironman or a triathlon in any distance where we've got a run, bike, a swim, bike, run, and then an ultra marathon where we're saying going from morning, afternoon, night.
Yeah, okay.
So are my needs going to be the same throughout a race or do they change?
Really good point. Okay, well, maybe I'll answer the Ironman side of things and you can answer the ultra side of things because that's your wheelhouse. But I would say, I mean, naturally, right, during a swim, we're not really consuming nutrition. I have seen some slower swimmers, so really kind of pushing the time limit, will actually put a gel in their swim cap or up their wetsuit sleeve. Not necessarily something I would recommend, but I have seen people do it, or people that are conscious of how long they're going to be in the water for. If they feel like they need a bit of an energy hit, this is obviously for, slightly slower swimmers. And again, credit to them, it's what they need to do. But otherwise in the swim, right, naturally pretty fasted, just a bit of salt water, which might, upset the guts. But once we hop on the bike, I do feel like sometimes I have this conversation with clients where getting nutrition in and hydration on the bike is so much easier than doing it on the run, purely because we don't have that mechanical digestion and that constant shaking in our gut, whereas we do on the run. So while, technically we don't necessarily need to change our maybe say hourly carbohydrate goal over the course of an Ironman, what works well, what I see for a lot of people is pushing a higher intake on the bike. Say, for example, maybe they're sitting up around that 90 to 120 gram carbs per hour on the bike because it's comfortable, they've got improved digestion, it's really kind of the buffet, right? You're almost carb loading within the race, which is fantastic. And then once they hop off the bike, they might struggle to get that much in when they're running for whatever reason, might feel uncomfortable. But we could scale that back to maybe 70 to 80 grams of carbs per hour. They've built up that really good store on the bike. So I would say, in a sense, again, it really depends on what you're doing. If you're someone that can just maintain, 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour for the entire race, fantastic. But if you are someone that can kind of leverage the bike, you feel more comfortable, or you are worried that you're going to have gut problems, say on the run, I do think a really smart strategy can be leveraging the bike and maybe dialing it back a little bit on the run. With hydration, again, it's probably so much easier to get through, a 750ml bottle per hour when you're on the bike and you can visually see it. You've got access to it at all times. Whereas when we're on the run, a lot of people don't like wearing a nerd belt or carrying a flask. They're just relying on cups. And, on a good day, you might get 200 mils in a cup, right? So then it's okay, well, how many aid stations are you passing through per hour? Maybe if you're going to grabbing 3 or 4 cups per hour, you might be able to still maintain that same hydration plan that you have on the bike. But for our big sweaters, the ones that are getting through 1.5 liters per hour on the bike, it becomes quite hard for them to be able to match that on the run as well. So I would say, if we're doing maybe a 70.3 or an Olympic distance, our needs can probably stay pretty consistent over the course of the race. But when you've got those bigger ones like the full Ironman, are you comfortable consuming the same amount for a 42K run that you are over a 4 to 6 hour bike ride? And again, who knows? Maybe the temperature changes. Maybe, Bustleton last year, I think it like a storm came through on the bike and everyone was shivering. That was so cold. But then by the time they hopped on the run, sun was out again. It's really hot. So maybe during that time on the bike, people are, subconsciously kind of reducing their fluid intake because they're cold, but then they get on the run and it's hot. Okay, I think you do also need to be able to adapt to the climate or how you're feeling on the day. Probably that was a bit of like a, here, there, and everywhere kind of answer. I feel like it's so personal, but I know for me, if I can speak even from my personal experience, I can smash like a really high amount on the bike. But when I get on the run, one, I feel like I don't need to hit 90 grams of carbs per hour because I'm feeling super fueled from the bike. And also, I don't like having, 3 or 4 gels per hour. So for me, I mean, I even do that. Um, yeah, would be my indirect answer.
I think it's very similar in the world of ultra marathon because if you're serious about performing really well in your ultra, you need to have a nutrition strategy for the different stages of your ultra. And whether that is you having a morning strategy like it is in triathlon on the bike, where you almost want to front load your calories, knowing that, hey, in the back end,
Yep.
just purely a function of putting so much fluid, so much food, so much carbohydrate in my gut, there's going to be gut fatigue in there. There's just going to be some problems. That's just natural in the back end of a race. That's okay. If I've got a good amount of fuel at this front end, I know I can swap over to just Gatorades or Coke or just a few lollies to get me home if I've done that.
Yep.
What's another interesting conversation is having a strategy when it's cool in the morning. We know that when it's cool, you can get more fluid in, you can get more fuel in. You're perfusing your gut, you're perfusing your muscles. It's a lot nicer of a system to work in as the temperature goes up. We're sweating more. We might not be replacing as much of those losses. We're not perfusing the gut as much. It gets a lot tougher. So you can change your strategy and go, okay, well, while it's cooler, why don't we aim for 90 to 100 grams just to get it in, knowing that during this period when it's midday to 3 p.m., it's going to be pretty tough. So why don't we drop that down to 50 grams? Maybe there's an hour there where we're not getting much in at all, but that's okay because we've accounted for it here.
Yep.
The other strategy I think is getting really popular in ultra marathon is, okay, what's the train doing? And if you're in a mountain race and if you're running flat, for sure, it's quite easy to get fueling. But one, there's a practical aspect of when you're climbing and you're running on technical trail. Can I physically get this out of my pack?
Especially if you're using poles, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And then it's tough. Like going uphill is very tough. Your heart rate gets high. It gets a lot harder to eat food. So there's having a strategy. Okay, we've got a big climb up here. How do I prep my body, make sure I've got the fuel on board so when I go up this climb, I'm good. And then if it's a really big climb, how do I make sure by the time I'm halfway up, I'm still getting enough fuel on board to finish off? And you know what? We're going to come down. We've got a big drop here. Then we're flattening out. Let's take it back a bit there. So there absolutely is a strategy. And that's where knowing the course, knowing the aid stations, knowing how far between aid stations you have, and then having good options, having an A plan, having a B plan, having a C plan, and breaking up your course, so important for ultramarathon.
Definitely a good answer. Out of curiosity for you, do you feel up or down? Do you have a preference or do you just have to make it work?
I definitely put in more fuel going up.
Yep.
And I guess it depends what your strategy is going on the hills too. A lot of people, I mean, I don't run all the hills, but I try to make a good effort to go a bit harder on the hills, to attack the hills and go up. And like everyone changes. And again, I'm not doing UTMB and going up those. It is very energy taxing. So I personally, I love getting in extra fuel and then letting my gut rest as I go down on the flats and going, you know what, I'll give it a bit of a break. I'll rehydrate, won't put as much in because I know, you know what, in 15 K's time, I've got to go up this other mountain. So I'm just going to start prepping for that.
Yep, nice. No, that's good. Yeah, even for me on the bike, I'll always get fuel in going up, even though I'm out of breath, because when I go down the downhills, I'd say I'm not the most confident bike handler. So if I'm one-handed going down a steep descent, not good for me. So yeah, I feel going up too.
Yeah.
All right, next question is probably related to both combat and endurance sport. It's a good one. Is sweat testing worth it?
Been having this conversation a lot. And I guess, I mean, let's talk about it generally, I suppose, and
Mhm.
then we could probably talk about it if it's worth it in combat sports endurance. When it comes to sweat testing, it's very situation dependent. I think for the majority of athletes, it's probably not worth it. I think if you're an endurance athlete, you're turning over more than 5 liters of sweat regularly during training or competition. And if you don't sweat too much and you're very good at replacing the fluid, say if you sweat a liter and you can easily replace 800 mil, 900 mil, 950 mil, then yes, you should get a sweat test. The problem with sweat testing, and I've thought this for years because I've had a sweat test kit and we've gone around and tested hundreds of athletes. how reliable and how accurate are they? I'm still not completely sold on the technology, and that's purely from me taking sweat tests from an athlete that's sitting here, and then I get them back 2, 3 days later, and then we do the same thing and we get different results. And a lot of dietitians make the mistake of saying, oh, it's just a one and done test. You get that done once, you're good to go. It's like, no, no, you're not. That's why I say, okay, if you're going to do it and you're an athlete that fits that bill, get it done at the start of your training camp or your whenever you're starting this block of training, getting ready for the race, get it done in the middle. And then, if possible, get it done at the end and see if it does change. See if it changes when it different weather conditions, where you are in the world. See how it changes to your diet. You'll be very surprised how your sweat tests change in correspondence to your diet. It's good information to have. Good information to have, but I wouldn't recommend that people take it and you go 1-to-1 with it. That's the biggest mistake people make with sweat tests is, Loz, I sweat test you, it comes back 1,400 milligrams of sodium loss per liter of fluid. So that means for every liter of fluid I have during my triathlon, I've got to put 1,400 milligrams back in. That's not how your body works. And if you do that for an extended period of time over your race, you're going to have severe issues. There's a very small percentage of athletes where they can get away with that. And that's generally the phenotype you see at the elite level of endurance sports. They don't sweat a lot. They don't put their system in as much stress where they're going to see problems by overdoing sodium because they're getting in enough fluid. The sodium they're getting in is balancing everything. It's those guys, which is the 80-90% of endurance athletes that sweat a lot, can't replace the fluid to a point that is adequate. They put too much sodium in. Instead of solving a problem, they actually create another one.
Yep.
And that's a huge mistake. So I think sweat tests are worth it if you know how to use the information. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's great. And, I guess the biggest thing we see, especially in the triathlon community, is, the precision fuel and hydration tests. And, as far as I'm aware, you're just sitting there sometimes in an air conditioned room, getting your sweat test done. And I think it's hard because they probably don't explain to athletes how that applies over, a 10 to 12 hour race versus, just that one kind of snapshot that they get. And again, I've never been there and done the sweat test with you as well, but it's, for me, I just think, how is sitting down, getting a sweat test done relevant to maybe being out there for a 60-minute run in the full sun? So yeah, I think they are really helpful to have. And for me as well, like if an athlete comes to me with a sweat test, it gives us a really fantastic baseline to start with and a benchmark. And then from there, based on how they're feeling, how they're responding, what their weight changes are before and after training, with that, we can then further fine tune it and then extend that out over, a 5+ hour race.
Yeah, I think that sitting down and doing that test is great if you have cystic fibrosis, which is what that test was originally designed
Really?
for, right? That is the technology behind how they do that.
Wow.
And I love Precision. Like, I think they've got a great company. I love Andy's work. I love their fueling. I love their carbohydrate products. I do think, though, that they have absolutely nailed the niche in triathlon. Going back to that point, I think if you find the people that are least at risk of having complications from having too much sodium, you're probably going to find them in these shorter to middle distance triathlon where precision is really, really present, right? Like most of those top athletes use it, they use the system, and it's because those athletes can basically replace most of their losses. They're not going for extended periods of time where having too much salt is going to disturb their system so much. So I think that's important. And to your point, I've done so many sweat tests and they do change. They do change. And you've got to do them in the environment or as close to as the environment that you're competing in to get good information out of it.
Yeah, good point.
All right, let's wrap that one there. And what do we have? Oh, Loz, this is a good one. It's a really good one.
Okay, hit me.
I know I need to eat more when I'm training, but I feel guilty about it. How do I get around this?
Yeah, it's unfortunate, isn't it, that we as humans feel guilty for eating when our body really needs it for exercise. And I think, I didn't start out doing triathlon. I've gone through a few different sports to get to it. And I'd say I work with a lot of clients who are in a similar position. They've done CrossFit or they've done soccer or they've just been normal gym, and then they get into something like triathlon or ultra running, which is so demanding on their body. And they quickly realize that the way they have been eating for a long period of time is no longer potentially adequate. They're constantly hungry. They're second guessing themselves. Should I be eating this much? Or, I'm crashing out in all of my sessions. Maybe I'm not eating enough. And I think it's hard because you've got those people that are, balancing weight loss goals, or you've got people that potentially have either resolved or unresolved disordered eating behaviors and tendencies as well. And it can be very hard to, reassure someone that they are or they aren't eating enough. But I feel like ultimately, if you're having those thoughts, either I don't think I'm eating enough or, I'm feeling guilty for it, it's probably a pretty good sign that you're not eating enough, because I feel like when we are constantly, deprived or under eating, the head noise and the food noise really increases, because it's, ultimately our body kind of trying to tell us, direct us to, hey, we need some more energy. And I feel like, if that is something that you're struggling with, one of the best things you can do, I think, for reassurance is, work with someone, like reach out to someone external who is detached from your thoughts, your feelings. They've got a very objective view of what you need. We can be there to kind of, put the feelings aside and really help identify, okay, this is what you should be having per day. But I think if it is something you're feeling guilty with, I completely understand. I think especially social media and, fitness culture, it can be really hard for us to be okay having, an extra cup of rice with lunch or whatever that might be. But maybe even if it's, starting small and, okay, you've identified, all right, I need to eat a little bit more, but I do feel guilty. If you are going to add a little bit extra, do it around training. Instead of trying to go for a 90-minute run on 2 rice cakes with a little bit of honey, add a bit of peanut butter and add a banana on there. We're not talking about going out and having an extra pizza to compensate, but I think implementing some maybe small specific strategies or comfortably being able to increase your food intake where it's, I guess, worthwhile as well can be a good place to start. Because if you're going to be having that fuel right before training, it's there available in the blood for us to use. Our body's going to use it straight away. And I sometimes think, stepping back a little bit in terms of food is not just there to help us gain weight or lose weight. I think that's the narrative for, for many people. And as dietitians, I think sometimes, people like lightheartedly will be, oh, I shouldn't like eat this around you, or you probably wouldn't order that. And we're not food police. I mean, I'm not a food police, you're not. But I think people are very close-minded, and it's easy to do. Yeah, food is so much more than just like something that makes us gain weight or lose weight. And typically what we see in endurance athletes, especially who are under fueling, is it has worse outcomes for things like body composition anyway, because we're going into that state where our body is just hanging on for dear life with, I don't actually know how much energy is coming in today, but I know I've got to get that 2K pool session and that 3K, like time trial in later in the day. So ultimately our body will kind of hold on to those energy reserves, and we might say increase fat stores, not kind of decrease weight, or we might start to feel a bit heavy or whatever that is. So in a way, it can almost worsen those types of feelings when you are under eating. But I think coming back to it is, yes, food can make us gain or lose weight, but it can also help us, improve our VO2 max, help us recover faster, go longer in a training session, have a better night's sleep. So I think sometimes reminding yourself that, yes, food can contribute to body composition, but it can also give me the energy to then get through this next training session, recover well, train again that next night, and actually enjoy my training, progress in it, is probably sometimes just a good reminder. Is, bring it back to food is so much more than just, a dieting mechanism. And also maybe just check in with your goals as well. Do you want to achieve this 70.3 that you signed up for? Do you want to feel like shit after every training session? If you want to achieve that race, you don't want to be on the couch completely bedridden all day. You need to slowly, find, I guess, a better relationship with food and be able to incorporate it to suit your needs. And I think starting around training is a good one. If you're a morning trainer, go from being fasted to maybe having a few pieces of dried mango. Once you feel comfortable with that, have a couple of pieces of toast or move on to a bowl of oats. But if you're needing to add a bit more food, do it around training, because then I think that can help you feel like it's a bit more purposeful, and it's going to get utilized immediately too.
I feel like the people you hang around with have a huge impact on your perception of yourself and your body image. I always used to find when I was in the combat sports space and it's so weight focused and we're training without our shirts on, and we have to be, right? We've got to make weight at the end of the day. We go to the competition, we've got to step on a scale, we've got to be a certain weight. That was when my body image was at its absolute worst, but it was also when I probably looked the best as well, when I was the most leanest. I look back at photos and I go, oh my God, like I never saw myself like that. But now that I move more into the endurance space, no one in my training team or anyone that I train with, we don't talk about body composition in that same vanity way.
Mm-hmm.
All we ever talk about is the performance. Okay, what do you want to do for this race? How are you going to attack this hill? What are your splits? How do you want to get this time down? Are you doing this in the gym? Are you hitting these numbers? It's so performance focused. And that is so good for your mental health and how you perceive yourself when you look in the mirror. And that really does come down to, okay, what's my goal here? What am I choosing to focus on? And am I focusing on aesthetics or am I focusing on performance? And when you choose to focus on performance, you will find your self-perception and your body image significantly improves.
definitely. And I think I've been pretty open on previous podcasts in the past how I went through a really big period of my life when I was in my like mid-teens where I had an eating disorder, and that was at my peak. I was doing figure skating, representing Australia. And it wasn't until probably 3 or 4 years later and I got into CrossFit that I finally started to be able to change that narrative for me. And I still credit CrossFit to probably the thing, in addition to working with a dietitian myself, that transformed that mindset for me, because when I started doing CrossFit, something so physically demanding, I could no longer get away with having a couple of grapes before training or, skipping breakfast in the morning. And that really helped me to see, wow, food is the gateway for me to be able to actually show up in these sessions, like compete with my friends, get a good time, finish the WOD first. And then moving into triathlon, it's, been the same. You can't go for a 6-hour bike ride or nothing. So I think, yeah, also kind of shifting, like you said, shifting the mindset from more of a body composition to a performance focus can be a big help as well.
Absolutely. All right, that's how are we doing for what's our time at, Josh? Maybe all right, we should get
Last one more question, do you reckon, for
let's do
this
one.
episode?
Yeah.
So, like we said, we've kind of hitting all boxes, and this is relevant because I was actually at Ascot Racecourse the other day. But you've been working with JMac, and one of the most prestigious elite jockeys in Australia, if not the world. Yeah, what do you think the difference in weight cutting with horse riding is versus combat sports versus rowing, Olympic weightlifting? What do you see some of the biggest differences being?
Yeah, I think firstly, J-Mac is one of the greatest athletes, period, in Australia. I know he's a Kiwi, but we'll claim him
Oh, we'll
as our
claim
own.
it. Yep.
I often use Volk as my top end reference when I go, okay, elite athletes, elite mindset, how they apply themselves to their craft, how they go about achieving greatness. And since working with J-Mac, he's probably up there as well. And I think I've had 4 athletes that I've worked with over my career that are legitimately the very best in the world at what they do. And I'm not just talking about world championship. Okay, I'm the best in this weight class. Like I am pound for pound the best at what I do, or I am the single greatest at this sport, better than all the other champions. So 4 of them, one of them being JMac. And you can see why. There's commonalities between all of those athletes that make those guys great. And it's very interesting in those 2 worlds when you think about, okay, jockeys and fighters, because one of the biggest hurdles they have to get over is making weight. And it's tough for both of them. For the MMA fighters, they do these much bigger weight cuts and they come down over 8 to 10 to 12 weeks and they go through these grueling fight camps, and then they've got to go through the stress of a fight week. They've got all the media, and then they're walking out on stage in front of millions of people, and you've got 25 minutes or 15 minutes to show all your hard work. And there's a result. It's either you won or you didn't. With the jockeys, it's far more interesting and far more intricate because they're making weight 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a week, and they're doing it during the season, which can be 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 months of the year. So you're doing far smaller weight cuts, but it's not like they're tiny weight cuts. These guys are still losing 5% of their body
And it's
weight.
relative to their weight, right? Because they're quite light, these
Yeah.
guys.
And I think what I've noticed in the jockey world, most of the elite guys are walking around between 58 and 60 kilos, yet they're still riding anywhere from 53, 54. If they get a 57, that's a good ride. And so you're balancing this then and going, okay, how do I take this person who is a high performance athlete that is still riding track work multiple times throughout the week? They're still doing other training outside in the gym. And then multiple times throughout the week, they're getting on the treadmill or they're getting in the sauna or they're rugging up and going for a walk and they're sweating down. And then they go ride and then they've got a day off, got to come back up, and then we've got to come back down again. And then we've got to go to our lowest weight on Saturday, and then we've got to come back up, and then we've got to do it all again the next week. So it's a very intricate system, but there is a way to do it. That's what I've definitely found, and working with guys like J-Mac and all the other jockeys that we work with, there is a system you can use and it does make a big difference. You do use a lot of the same principles that you use with the fighters where you're talking about, okay, we can do really short, acute, low fiber. We can manipulate carbohydrates just to get some drop. But one of the big things is that you don't want to be in this permanent chronic state of low energy availability. You can do all of these things to temporarily manipulate your weight 2, 3, 4 times throughout the week while still eating enough calories to give your body enough fuel for you to be the very best at what you do. But you need to understand, okay, what foods work well with my body? How do I drop a kilo here? How much can I rely on sweating? How do I refuel during the races and make sure when I've got 8, 9 rides on a day and, I'm going from my lightest race to my heaviest, what are the best foods to have when I'm at the track and still riding and still make weight? And then when I finish, okay, I've got a day off Sunday, I want to relax a bit more. What's the best way for me to relax? So when I wake up Monday, I'm not freaking out because I've got to ride on Wednesday. So it's a very intricate system. There's absolutely a way to do it. You've just got to be so dialed in, and you've got to be dialed in for such a long period. I think that's the big difference between the fighters. Fighters have these 1 to 2 really intense fight camps throughout a year, 8 weeks long. Then you're done, you get a break, you do it again. Jockeys, it's just, you've got to be so dialed on, and you've got to have it down pat because you're spending half of your year going through this routine, and then you get a couple months off, and then you've got to go back into it. So same concept, very different application.
Yep, no, it's a good answer. It's impressive what they do, and again, another high risk sport, right? They're not just going for a speed walk; they are on a very fast moving, unpredictable animal as well. So again, nutrition and hydration is so important for these types of sports where you do run the risk of decision making, having that really sharp processing as well is so important. And if you're constantly dieting and or water fasting, you're putting yourself at risk as well.
Yeah, I find the jockeys are an interesting one because they're high performance athletes, but they're riding a high performance athlete in the horse as
Mm.
well, right? So it's interesting because sometimes the jockeys I feel don't get the credit that they deserve, but the elite level jockeys I've worked with are some of the best athletes I've seen. It's just that world is just as crazy as what the fighting world is. The culture behind how jockeys have to make weight and waste, as they call it, is pretty crazy. Like they still have flipping areas at race courses. It's still very common for jockeys to eat a can of tuna a day for months on end. So they just waste down, lose muscle mass. And then, like you said, they're getting on these high performance machines that are running at extreme paces, and they've got to control that while having all other high performance machines around them. And then it's unfortunate you see jockeys fall. And I often think how much of that is due because they've been wasting too aggressively. They don't have enough fuel. They haven't used the right supplements in leading up to it. They haven't put the right hydration or fuel in on the race day to make sure that they're mentally acute. So it's like, it's a crazy, crazy environment, yet we don't talk about it very much. But what I've found is that the best jockeys do take it seriously and they do have a system and they absolutely nail it, and it does contribute to their performance.
Yeah, definitely. No, well said. And it's an awesome cohort for us to work with. So grateful for it. But I reckon first step of the day, let's cut it there. Thank you.
Yeah, first episode done.